The hero's quest story tells how a boy becomes a mature man. In the final stages of the quest, the hero meets and marries the princess or goddess. How did she get there? What journey did she take to become the partner of the hero? The heroine's story has always been before our eyes. When we look at the tales women themselves tell, the stories women have always told, her story is there. Her story is convoluted, spiraling in and out of the forest, away from home, and on to new households. Her biggest test is not courage or strength, but resolve. The capacity to keep on fighting for the right to be herself. She becomes the queen of her own life. Welcome to the first MythLit webinar hosted by the Fates and Graces for the myth community to read together, write together, and celebrate the field of mythological literature. If that sounds like fun to you, you are in the right place. My name is Joanna Gardner, and today on the webinar, we also have Stephanie Zachowski. Stephanie and I are founders of the Fates and Graces, and today we are delighted to host Jody Genshin-Bauer, who has done so much for the myth community, not least by writing the book Jane Eyre's Sisters, How Women Live and Write the Heroine's Story. Steph will drop some links in the chat with more information about the Fates and Graces and Jody, including Jody's Facebook page, which you can follow to stay updated on her blog posts. And Jody, I would love to invite you to take a minute and take the virtual microphone to say a few words of greeting before we jump into our discussion.
Well, hi, everybody. I'd say good morning, but I know some of you are in Europe, and that's very exciting. So good evening to you. And I'm so pleased that so many people want to come and talk about this. This book was a passion project. I started thinking about it in the 80s, and it took its own path, like the heroine does. But I finally wrote it and published it in 2015, and I'm really excited that it seems to be gaining traction again. 9 years after it came out, that's really thrilling to me. So welcome. I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you so much, Jody. We are looking forward to it as well. So we'll dive more into the book and your process, Jody, in just a minute, and then we'll have time for questions from the community. So everyone, please feel free to send in questions via that Q&A button as we go. And then at the end of our hour together, we'll close with a writing reflection so that we can process some of the ideas that we'll talk about today. But before we start, let's begin today with a chat check-in. So open up the chat window if you haven't already. And if you would, let us know where you're joining from. And if any images came to mind for you at that word spiraling in the quote that I just read from Jane Eyre's Sisters, the word spiraling, any images that came up for you. I am joining from Santa Barbara today, and what comes up for me with that word spiraling, the first thing is always the galaxy, our home galaxy, the Milky Way, right, with the beautiful star spiral. Jody, wondering if any images or ideas came up for you with that word spiraling this time around.
Well, I've always loved a spiral, and labyrinths and nautiluses, but for me the spiral also means that we circle around and we seem to come back very often to the same place, except for it's not the same place. We have grown. Maybe we're getting the same lesson, but it's at a higher level. I do believe that we sort of go like this, and so whenever we feel like we've gotten back to why am I having to go through this lesson again? I think we're going through it differently from a different area or different attitude. And so that's why I love that image of the spiral.
Yeah. Steph, how about you? Any thoughts or images come up for you at that word spiraling?
Well, what immediately bubbled up was Celtic knots
Oh,
and the interweaving of Celtic knots. And yeah, and just how spirals show up in so many different images all over the world. It's quite curious. I've always been drawn to them.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I think probably many folks in the community share similar feelings. Speaking of which, Steph, do we have any shares coming in the chat?
We do. We have people from all over, by the way. So welcome, welcome. It's super fun. But we have Caden says soul work. We've got one saying epigenetics in my line of women. Sally Ann is the download journey and back. The downward journey and back. Download. I'm thinking computers, aren't I? I'm and with the Borg here. I don't know. Um, oh, here's Dr. Heaslip saying such a landmark contribution to the study of questing, Jody. So grateful for Jody. We are two spiraling and multi-dimensional helix.
Mm, awesome.
Uh,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah, and there's more. There's more.
Really? Oh, okay. Awesome. Well, everyone enjoy the chat. Thank you so much for joining in. Um, yeah, just appreciating all the different perspectives on that one idea, that one, 3 syllables, spiraling, and so many perspectives come into the space with us. So thank you. Okay, well, with that, I believe it is time for us to begin our official interview portion of today, Jody, if that's okay. Okay, so I have a few
bring it
questions.
on.
I'll lift up some questions, but we can take the conversation any direction that you would like to go. And so the first question or comment I'll lift up is wondering if you would share with us how you describe this book. I'll hold it up again. How you describe this book to people who have never heard of it, like if you have an elevator pitch that you use.
Yes. Well, usually I start out with saying, have you heard of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey? If they say no, I say, well, it's it was the basis for the first Star Wars movie. George Lucas knew the work, and so it's the story of the hero and how he's called out to an adventure and he defeats the evil villain um, and goes back home and becomes king. I said, my book is about a very different story that I noticed in the novels of women. And when I started really looking at it, I could trace it back to when women first started getting published. And then I found it in biographies and autobiographies of famous women. And at that point, I thought, I'm on to something. And I went looking for other books that talked about this, and I didn't really find them. So at some point, I said, if I want to read that book, I have to write it.
So that's like the perfect tee up for my next question, which is wondering if you'd share with us kind of the story of this book, like its origin story, like first idea, which you've already shared a little bit of, and then how it came to be, and even going into maybe ending the story with when you first held a printed copy in your hand,
Yeah.
right? So the beginning is the idea, the triumphant
Yeah.
conclusion is holding the book. So
Okay.
anything you'd love to share about that?
So I was in a book club in the 80s and we read a lot. We read everything, but we did tend to read more books by novels. And that's when I first started feeling like I'm reading the same story over and over again. And I even started calling it the standard feminist novel. Um, so that sat in my brain for about 20 years. And then I went to a retreat, and one of the men who was teaching in that retreat is a man named Richard Smoley, who is an author of books on Gnosticism, which I had read some of his books. We started talking one day on a break about his books. And then I said, and I've since learned that this is what all writers, published writers encounter, the person who says, well, I have a book idea. but he was very gracious to me. And he said, tell me about it. And I told him about it. And he reaches in his pocket, he brings out a card. He says, I'm the acquisitions editor for Quest Books, and we would be very interested in publishing it if you write it. So I took that as a sign. And I actually started writing it. And I worked on it for about a year, and I bogged down. And I had heard of Pacifica at that point, and I had really been attracted to the Myth program, which has a large component of literature in it. But I hadn't had a good reason to, spend all the money and drop out of my work and go to graduate school. But this seemed to me like the reason. For one thing, when I looked at how you write a book proposal, and there's a whole section on, who are you? And I sort of had nothing. So I thought, well, if I go to graduate school, get my PhD, write my dissertation on this, then that'll do that. So I did. And, so that was another 4 years. And then I finished my dissertation, and then I took it, and I had gone to a wonderful workshop on how to turn your dissertation into a book, because I didn't want to publish my dissertation. I find dissertations very boring. I'm not fond of academic writing. So I worked on that for another year, and then I had kept Richard apprised all through this process. And so I sent it off, and they loved it, and they said yes. And they assigned me a lovely editor, but she also made me work. She said, seems to me you need a chapter on this. And I think even another chapter on this. And I looked at her email and went, she's totally right. She doesn't understand that I now have to go out and read 12 more books, and, but so did all that. And the whole publishing process, start to finish, I think took about 18 months. But and they picked the cover. The cover wasn't my idea, but I loved it. It's Arthur Rackham, and the woman out in the wilderness. I just said, and I used to be kind of red-haired, so I actually thought, well, that even looks like me. But yeah, that moment when the box arrives and you open it up and you see your book, it's a peak memory of my life.
Can you share a couple of details? Like, what time of day was it?
Oh, I don't remember that. I mean, it arrived, and I hauled it in the house, and the first thing I did was open it up, and then I pulled out the books, and you flip through them and everything, and then I think I took pictures of it, and I sent them to people, or posted on Facebook, and I called a few people, and went, my book is there, my book is. Yeah, so yeah, it was very exciting.
Okay, so this was a multi-year process, 20
This-
years of germination, and then grad school. But you
I-
were one of the blessed people in grad school who knew exactly what they were going to write their dissertation about, which
Yes.
I'm a little
Yes.
envious of that. But and then after grad school, another 18 months of the publication process. So I mean, I feel like we're getting up towards 30 years total.
Yeah, if you the germination was about 20 years, and then I would say when I actually first started writing it to when it came out was 9 years.
Okay, 9 years.
Yeah, and I said to Maureen Murdoch at one point, who was in school with me, it took me 9 years to get this book published, and she said all my books take 9 years. So,
Okay, well, there we go.
yeah,
So when planning your life, plan 9
Yeah.
years per book.
yeah.
And where in the process did you know the title? Like, how did the title come to you?
Yeah, pretty late. And what happened is I went to a writers conference at the AWP, which I forget what it stands for, but it was in Seattle, and I went and I did a little bit of field testing. Because my first thought had been that I would call it She's Leaving Home, after the Beatles song, because there's so much leaving. But I had also started thinking, Jane Eyre was my keystone character because she's the one who leaves so often and goes through all the stages that I talk about. But I was talking about all these other different characters of novels and thinking, well, they're sisters. And so I came up with Jane Eyre's sisters. And when I went around at the writers conference and just test drove, what do you think of this or this? People just reacted to Jane Eyre's sisters. I mean, most of it was, oh, Jane Eyre, I love Jane Eyre. But she's leaving home, just meh. So that's where I got that.
Awesome. So, I mean, I feel some of that resonance myself. I'm one of those people who loves Jane Eyre. And when I first heard the title, I think part of me was like, that's me. I am Jane Eyre's sister.
Yeah.
And like if you read the book and connect with it on any level, there is a feeling of sisterhood. So I feel like it tapped into something very deep, that title. And I appreciate it. So thank you for titling a book that. Okay, sorry, I got distracted. Let me go back to the questions. So we talked a little bit about the publication process. Would you like to share any more? Like was it difficult at all, that 18 months? Were there any peaks and valleys? Anything that might be useful or interesting for the community about the process itself of publication?
Well, I think someone I went to school with who's writing a book right now really captured it. It's a bipolar process. There were some days when I thought, this is brilliant, this is awesome, I love this. And there were other days when I went, this is just horrible. How am I'm fooling myself. Nobody will want to, you do this thing. And but I'd gotten some very good advice about how to write a book, which is that you have a ritual and a set time, and you sit down, and maybe there was one man I read about who had a cardigan that he put on for his writing session and took off when he was done. And it's all the way you signal to psyche that I am ready to write now. So there was that discipline involved. I don't believe in waiting for the muse. I think that you invite the muse and you show your willingness to allow the muse to take you over. And I did feel taken over. I felt many times like I was channeling. That this was not coming from me at all, that I was downloading. There was information that came out that I would look at on the page and go, where'd that come from? I didn't know that. But I limited it. 3 or 4 hours a day, most, maximum. And, you just plug. And I also did the trick where you don't finish a paragraph or don't finish a sentence. You leave it so that when you come back, you can make kind of a running start. But it was, I would say most of the time, it was joyful.
That's
It
nice
was
to hear. I was getting so worried about all the despair in the process.
Well, yeah, there was that, but like I said, this was a passion project, and I really loved it when stuff came out that I didn't know I knew.
Yeah.
And I was excited about it the whole time. And of course, I had that wonderful assurance that I had the publisher,
Yeah.
which really at times did keep me going. Because, well, for one thing, I was obligated.
Right. Okay, so just wanting to go back for 1 second and be super clear. So ritualizing the writing process, even like putting on a sweater. I'm picturing Mr. Rogers putting on his sweater when he comes in, and limiting the writing time to 3 to 4 hours a day, and breaking off the day's writing mid-sentence so that there's momentum there for the next day. Did I get everything?
Yeah, and I know people who write for one hour or write one page. They set a limit. I didn't do that, but if you think about it, if you write a page a day in a year, you have a book. You have a big book, 3-6. So
has your writing process changed since then, or is that still what you do?
Well, right now I'm not working on a project. When I have a specific project, yes, but now I'm mostly just blogging or writing essays, and those can be a little different. I usually toss those off as one entire thing. So,
Uh-huh.
but I usually write in the morning. That's my thing. Morning time is my creative time. And I think you have to be aware of when you know, I know people who write in the middle of the night or people who write in the late evening. I'm a morning person. I write pretty much first thing after breakfast.
Yeah. Um, I feel like I'm veering a little bit away from the book itself, but I want to ask one more question, kind of process related, and that is, can you speak a little bit to how writing this book changed you? Like how, if at all, right? I'm assuming it did. Like how were you a different person at the end of that 9 years than you were at the beginning of that 9 years?
Well, for one thing, there's a huge sense of accomplishment. It's a confidence booster
Mm.
to actually finish something, and especially something that takes that long and that much work. Um, I think I was changed just by some of the things I learned. Of course, you know, my horizons expanded. Um, and I also one thing that was interesting is that I said to everybody, you know, I did not set out to write some sort of feminist manifesto. That wasn't what I wanted to do. But in the course of writing about women, I realized you can't write about women without becoming somewhat political, because, you know, all the stuff that I put in the book about how women's writing is not seen as equal to men's writing, and how women have been silenced or restricted or put down for how it was really hard. I mean, I had to write that stuff. And so when people edited it in my beta reader, I said, now I do not want to come off as strident, because I do believe that if you have an agenda, um, if you have a point of view that you're really trying to push on people, even if they agree, it's off-putting. I find it off-putting even when I agree, if I feel like someone is trying to make me feel a certain way. So that was an exercise in how do I get the point across, the facts across, the reality, um, in a way that isn't going to make someone unable to hear it. Because I do believe that if you are lecturing or arguing with somebody, usually they can't hear it. And actually, there's brain chemistry studies that show that that's actually true. So it was a fine line to walk, but it changed how I think I approached political discourse in general. It made me realize that well, it actually led to what became sort of my next stage career, which was lecturing on how the heroine offers us a different model for social activism than the hero, who is very much about defeating and winning and, you know, conquering and making you do what I want you to do. And the heroine, and I don't know if we're going to get into that, but she doesn't do things that way. So then, you know, getting clear on that as I wrote the book led me into going on what they call the Unitarian circuit, where I go around to different churches, not necessarily Unitarian, but give lectures on um, a more, what I say is a more effective way of being a social activist. So,
And that I also wanted to talk about, on a related note, how you have seen people work with these ideas, and that's one great example. You know how you have worked with these ideas yourself, applying them to social activism, which, you know, reading the book, that would not be the first thing that comes to mind for me, but it's so obvious now that you point it out. So are there other ways that you've seen people kind of, I'll say, apply these ideas?
well, one of the things that I get the most feedback on actually is how women feel like the book gives them permission to do what they have always wanted to do with their life, because they have, as we talk about in the book, you know, there's a lot of pressure on women to fit into this very narrow sphere. Even if you are a successful businesswoman, that your main priority is still taking care of others. And anytime you want to do something just for yourself, it's selfish. And so that people have told me, this just gave me permission to pursue what I want to do with my life. At my first book event, a woman stood up and said, I'm 71 years old and I never understood what it was I was trying to do with my life until I read this book. And that felt amazing. And another person told me I cried all night when I read that it would be okay for me to leave the situation I'm in.
Wow.
So, yeah, and that I didn't really, I mean, that's the story that women tell, but so many women have not heard that message. Even so, that, you can build a life where you're not first a wife and mother or daughter or, somehow related to somebody else. You're just you, and you can do that. So.
And you can be you and be things like wife, mother, daughter, etc. But making sure that you is in that list is so.
Yes.
I mean, I get those people who were so deeply impacted. For me personally, I found it not only illuminating, kind of on an intellectual level, but personally validating. Like, yeah, it's okay. Kind of like that word permission that
Yeah.
So thank you again for writing this one.
Yeah, I think so many of us go through life thinking we're a weirdo, that we're different, that we're unusual, that we're wrong, we're strange, whatever. And then you read somebody else's story and you realize, wait, that's my story. I'm not, there are other people like me. This is why representation matters so much, that we need to be able to see ourselves, so that we don't feel so isolated and cut off. And we need to understand that we're like other people. There are other people like us.
And we're not alone.
And we're not alone. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know we're getting to the bottom of the hour and I have a few more questions, but Steph, I'm wanting to check in with you. I feel like I have been stealing all the time with Jody. Is there anything that you wanted to chime in on or comment on about what we've been talking about, or?
Oh no, it's all wonderful. I have plenty, but there's also some questions from the audience too, but one that was a continuation of an earlier conversation you mentioned.
Maybe let's bring that in. And then, so let me, so I had two more questions I wanted to lift up for Jody, but let's do the continuation question first. And then Jody, we'll wrap up with our questions and then we'll all the way go into the Q&A. How about that?
Well, one of them was from Joe in the chat. I know, Johanna, we have one from you too, but this one was about, I'm most kind of spiraling back to that conversation about how the the feminine principle in the hero's journey is different, or how it's expressed, or even how the heroine's journey is different from the hero's journey. Some aspects there, if we could.
Okay.
So,
Well,
Jody, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yes.
Just to read chapter 4 of this thing, because chapter 4 breaks it down so clearly and so lucidly, those exact differences. So Jody, back to you now. I just wanted to give that, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll do a very quick answer. In the traditional hero's journey story that Joseph Campbell wrote about, the feminine is almost absent until the end. The princess is the prize. But the feminine also shows up maybe in the person of a temptress or a siren or an evil witch who tries to get him. So sort of a negative feminine figure who tries to interfere with the hero, or maybe a guiding person. If you've seen The Lord of the Rings and you've seen Galadriel, she serves in that capacity for Frodo, inspiring, helpful, but just someone you pass by. Traditionally, the hero just proves that he's enough of a man and that he's an adult male so that he can get married and be a father. And that's when the feminine comes in. He has to prove himself worthy of approaching the feminine first. And I actually recently gave a talk in which I suggested that we're telling the hero story differently now, because if you look at all of the superhero movies and other movies, the feminine and the masculine are usually working together, and actually the hero often has to prove himself capable of love before he even embarks on the journey or while he's on the journey. So it's not about, I'm just going to flex my muscles and beat the bad guy and then I get to get married. It's more like most of our modern, like Marvel heroes, the difference between them and the villain, and there's a very fine line between the villain and the hero. They're both all about conquering and winning, and our hero is their villain is our hero. But there's usually two characters and they're very similar, and the hero you can tell because he's the one who can love. So we're changing that story now. But yeah, a lot of Maureen Murdoch and other people went to Joseph Campbell and they said, well, what about women? Do women go on the journey? And he said, no, they don't have to go on the journey. They're the prize. They just have to, wait at home. And the women went, I don't think so.
And so Steph, did that answer the question? Was the question about what are some of the differences in the heroine's journey?
Yeah, Joe said thank you. I'm most curious how the feminine principle is expressed in the hero's journey.
Oh, in here. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, perfect. Well, so Jody, that what you just shared about what the changes you're seeing in the hero's journey recently, that kind of leads to my next question, which is, how have your ideas changed since the book came out, if at all?
Yeah, they have. Because I was writing kind of a retrospective, of a review of how the story so far. I was limited to that, but since I've published it and I've been speaking, and I blog now, and it's not on my Facebook page. I'm going to correct you. It's on my website, which is just jodybauer.com. I have a blog, been blogging for quite a few years now, mostly about what I see going on in popular culture as far as heroes and heroines. And so one of the things I've been working with, and that I actually address in my second book, is how to degender these stories. And so thinking about that, and I had read, oh gosh, and I can't remember the source of this, but this person said, in every story you have to ask, what is the character's motivation? And I started thinking about it, and that really crystallized for me that we can see the hero. His main motivation is actually to protect his community. And I would even argue maintain the status quo. He's not a change agent. He's protecting against the threat. So I called that person the protector. And certainly that is something anybody can do. They can be a protector of their community. My own character, the elitist, as I call her, because that's Greek for wandering heroine, and she's such a wanderer. I call the seeker because she's out looking for a different way of doing things and a different way of being in the world. Maureen Murdoch, who wrote The Heroine's Journey, which came out in 1990, to me, that her book was specifically about one generation, the baby boomer generation, which were women who were saying, I don't want to follow my mother's path, but I don't have any real role models for what I want to do. So I'm going to follow men. I'm going to be like a man. And then they found that was not satisfying. But I called them the pathfinders because they were breaking new ground and breaking ground for all of us. And they, now there's a lot of criticism about how they did that. But you know, when you're the first person walking across an unbroken field of snow, going in thigh deep to try and break path, it's we got to give them credit, and then other people can follow and they can broaden the path, and maybe they can say, well, really, we need to go over here, it's easier. And then Kim Hudson wrote a wonderful book called The Virgin's Promise, and she based that on how she saw filmmakers telling female-centric stories, and that I called the integrator, because that person is trying to integrate their masculine and feminine sides, or perhaps even their shadow side and their conscious side. So I came up with these 4 different journeys, and I think there's no reason why any one person couldn't do all of them at some point in their lives. So yeah, that's the main thing, that I started going beyond, you know, this is the heroine journey, this is the hero quest, and trying to make it more applicable to different people.
And is that all in the Princess Powers Up, or is this
It's a chapter in the Princess Powers Up.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so
But if you go to my
your
blog,
webinar.
yeah, if you go to my blog, you'll see that I'm constantly talking about these issues, and I'm looking for signs of how, because I think the artists are usually ahead of the culture in terms of where we're going as a society. So I like looking at pop culture. I like looking at movies and television shows and say, what are they showing us now? And that's where I noticed that, oh, the hero, you know, the hero's not the same hero. He's a different guy now. So, and I had a long talk with John Booker about this from the Joseph Campbell Foundation, and John is working on the idea that instead of an individual going out on the quest, we're actually going out as groups. We're going out as you know, I mean, Tolkien did that with the Fellowship, but if you look at some of the recent Stranger Things, or Harry Potter, or you know, it's a group of friends who go out. It's and see it to the end. So John had this idea that we are now thinking more in terms of, it's not one person, but the community working for the community, which I really like, because I think one problem with being a hero is that you're so isolated and you burn out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, John's doing really great work with that. He's calling it the collective journey.
Mm-hmm.
And Steph, if we've got, I think his website is tellingabetterstory.com. You want to drop that in the chat? That's a space to watch for sure, what he's doing with the collective journey. And so with that, let's bring in questions from the community. So everyone, if now's the time, if you have any questions or comments or thoughts to share with Jody, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. Click that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And Steph, are we having more questions come in yet?
Yeah, so a really interesting question, and Johanna actually asked this very early on, and then you went into this gender conversation. So I think this ties in really well here. So she first wants to say thank you, Jody, for gifting us with your talk. And can you please give me suggestions about how I might use your book in my gender classes? I appreciate this book and the insights it presents about the heroine's journey.
Interesting. Let me say, I think maybe for one thing, the discussion about how one group has for so long dominated the conversation. The bit about how women's writing was not seen as equal to men's writing, and which can of course be extrapolated to any group that's not of the dominant culture, but how it's done is interesting. You know, you have certain people who are recognized as the authorities, and they decree and diminish, and they don't understand, you know, that work. They don't, because they don't relate. And I've had men say to me, men I like who are friends, oh, I don't read anything by women, I don't relate to it. So there's a block often in people's minds about, women's literature is all chick lit. The person who said to that, I said, have you read Toni Morrison? I mean, come on, but that is not chick lit. And yeah, I'm talking off the half of my head because I hadn't thought about this very much, but I think
Well,
there's
I'm wondering about, sorry, Jody, I'm wondering
Good,
about
go
like
ahead.
taking some of the examples from this book of the elitist journey, this wanderer story, and maybe not using terms like heroine,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And mapping those examples against what was going on at the time in history, like looking at what's the context around Jane Eyre itself. What are some of the other examples? But just looking at what was going on socially right before and right after some of these elitist stories came out. Just a thought for how maybe to apply this particular book in a gender class.
Right.
Um,
And that is something that I keep talking about, is that um, with each generation, the story got told differently because the each time women gained a little bit of freedom, but then in the new generation there's always a new, need. There's always, and we're still seeing that. It's no matter how far we come, there's more to be done. So maybe a discussion on, so what are the big issues right now from society? Where are people pushing against the restrictions, and it's I mean, we haven't in my lifetime, people came out of the closet. They never were out of the closet before. I mean, in my lifetime, when I was a child, it was illegal in England. We've seen that story, to be gay. Um, but each time we get some loosening of the rules and some freedom, it just brings it up to the next barrier and the next barrier.
spiraling, right?
So you might, I think, talk about, okay, so we've gotten away somewhat from gender roles, but where have we not gotten away from gender roles? Where are we still saying, you can't do this because you are, which is, Chris Downing brought that up in a lecture that I went to about how the discovery of gender is usually associated with a sense of loss because it comes in the form of, you may not do this because you are. It's not so much because you're a girl, you do this and this and this, but it's more like, you're not a boy, so you may not, or you're not a girl, so you may not. And I think a lot of what the non-binary movement is people saying, do not tell me what I can and cannot do. And I applaud that hugely, because we all benefit from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jody. Steph,
Yeah.
other questions coming
We
in?
do. We have another one from April Heaslip. She says, Jody, I love using your book in my pop culture courses. Your amplification of the pattern is so clear. I'm especially curious about your relationship, about your ideas about the relationship between the elitists and home, and applying Jung's transcendent function to this supposed paradox.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because at my dissertation defense, Chris Downing asked me, why do you write about this story where they're going out and away, when Chris and so many other women love the descent story, going down? And we had a long exchange for months after that by email and phone. And we identified that Chris had a very sweet, loving, supportive upbringing. And at midlife, she needed to encounter the dark feminine, because it was missing from her life, and she needed that for wholeness. I had not had a supportive and loving upbringing. I had an alcoholic mother. We had a family trauma that almost destroyed us. It was so my memory, actually, of being a teenager in my family home was that I was in a dark cave, with a very nasty person upstairs who, depending on how much she'd had to drink, was not going to be fun to be around. So I said, I don't need to go looking for the dark feminine. I grew up with that. I need something else. And am I getting away from the question? I need to, there's April's. I'm looking for April's question. I don't see it.
Sorry, it's in the chat. So she's asking about the whole archetype of home.
Yes. So
archetype of the elitist.
So home to the elitist is not a good place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many stories. If you think about Jane Eyre's home that she grew up in, where she was abused and mistreated, and she couldn't wait to leave, and she didn't want to go back to that. But the elitist, over time, as she goes through all these stages and learns discernment and learns who she is, and the ultimate goal is that she creates home in her own image. She creates the home that she can thrive in, and she does it for herself. Nobody does it for her. She creates it. She does then attract others to it, because other people, and this is one thing that I really like, is that there's usually a male character who looks at what she's doing and says, wow, I'd rather do that. Than if you think of Edward Ferrars in Sense and Sensibility, and his family have all these expectations, and you're supposed to do that. And he's like, no, I don't. I want to go to Eleanor and have this nice little cottage life. And The Color Purple, to me, was the most amazing example, because Celie has an abusive husband and she leaves him. And she goes and she creates this life for herself where she's sewing pants, which is a radical thing because women didn't wear pants then, but they're very expressive, beautiful pants. And her husband eventually gravitates toward that home. And he is changed by seeing what is going on. And he ends up living nearby and sewing shirts to go with it. But he gets it after watching Celie reject the life that, and the thing about being the oppressor and the tyrant and the abuser is that you're trapped in always having to keep oppressing and you're always so focused on keeping control over the person that your life is not good. And it just becomes about control. And once she escapes his control and he's not controlling her, I think he feels all of a sudden this tremendous sense of freedom. And he starts thinking, well, if I wasn't doing that, what could I be doing? So, yeah.
I wonder too about kind of going back to I think it was April's question about the transcendent function. It's almost like the tension of opposites for the elitist is false home and wandering. And that's the polarity, that's the tension that the elitist holds until the third thing, the transcendent function, offers the true home, right?
I can't go back. I
Right.
don't know where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's a very tense spot. I don't know what I'm doing next. But I know I'm not going back.
Yep.
So you're very much in attention. I had never thought about that. Thank you. Very much in attention holding space.
I think it was very interesting too, how you wrote about negativity, like the negative space. So how important it is for the wanderer not to know where she's going, what she's doing. And sitting in that, which is so uncomfortable.
And I'd never made that connection, that the negative space is holding tension. If for people who don't know, I got this from Drawing on the Right Brain. If you can't draw or you're not very good at it, what they suggest is you take a picture and you put it in front of you and you turn it upside down, and then you look at the negative spaces and you draw you don't draw the thing that you're trying to draw. You draw all the space around it. And that will define the thing. And I related this when I heard it to how adolescents behave, which is rejection, rejection, rejection. This is what I don't want. This is what I don't want. This is what I don't want. And it's a very painful process to go through for all involved. But hopefully at the end, a picture emerges of what you do want and who you think you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, that's beautiful. And I feel like that is I think, Jody, a nice place to wrap up the conversation and move into the poem, right? So let's hear some applause in the chat for Jody for sharing this book, for writing this book and sharing these ideas with us. And I will take this opportunity to point out again about Jody's website, which she mentioned, jodybauer.com. That's how you can get in touch with her for speaking engagements, especially like for film classes and for book coaching, which includes dissertation coaching. So Steph, if we could drop that link into the chat. And now we have 10 minutes left. So let's shift gears a little bit and do a quick writing reflection just to process some of what we've heard so far today. So I am going to read this poem out loud into the space, and then I'll offer a writing prompt for a free writing reflection. And the idea is for you to just keep writing anything that comes to mind. So get pen and paper or computer, however it is that you like to write. And I'll offer the writing prompt, and then you just begin writing. And I'll keep an eye on the time and let you know when it's time to stop writing. And meanwhile, you just keep writing forward. Anything at all that comes into your mind, just write it down. Don't go back and fix spelling or punctuation or anything. Just let your hand outpace the inner critic, which it will do. Just keep writing forward. You just sink into the moment and let the words flow up and out onto the paper or through the keyboard onto the computer, however you prefer to write. So, and one last thing, if you're writing along and you don't know what to say next, write the words, but what I really want to say is, and then keep going, right? But what I really want to say is, and keep going. And Steph and Jody, you are welcome to do this writing exercise as well, whatever you want to do. Okay, so take a few deep breaths and let them out, and shake out your arms and shoulders a little bit, maybe do some jazz hands. And Steph, let's go ahead and share that slide. And while I read, if you do listen to your intuition about whether you want to read the words visually along with, or if you want to close your eyes and listen, whatever feels appropriate for you. The journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Look over the poem and pick the line that sizzles the most for you, the line that burns most brightly, that most captures your imagination. Read that line again. Now read it again. And when I say begin, write that line down, word for word. Write it down and then keep writing. Let your hand just keep going. Let that line from the poem keep speaking to you via the words that come up. Okay? Begin. Okay, wrap up the thought that you're on. And know that if there's more you want to write, you can return to it. And look back over what you wrote and underline anything that seems extra important to you. And if there's anything from what you wrote that you'd like to share with the community, please feel free to type it into the chat so that everyone can hear what came up for you, especially if you feel like there's something that the community could benefit from that you wrote. And so while folks do that, Jody, was there anything that came up for you in the writing that you feel called to share? And Steph, same question for you, if Jody, you first.
There was a line about the terrible melancholy or something. And as someone who has freed herself from generational trauma, um, I've gotten to the point where I feel such sadness over those in my family who have not. And there's such a strong desire, I wish that I could help them free themselves, especially the next generation that I see still caught in it, and the inability to do so. And it's very hard to walk away as much as it's necessary to save my own life. But oh, the melancholy, the grief is very real.
Yeah, thank you. Steph, how about you?
The line that jumped out to me was, "But you didn't stop."
Mm,
And I think what came to me in the writing was from the previous conversation was to keep walking into the unknown, even amidst all the discomfort.
thank you. So we are just about at the top of the hour. We have a couple more things to share, but thank you so much, Jody. Let's hear it again in the chat for Jody and for the work that she's done and for this book that we all now have to benefit from and learn from and teach from. So thank you so much, Jody. And this might be a good time to share Jody's information. So this is how you can reach Jody, and the links are in the chat, the Facebook page, the website. Now, Jane Eyre Sisters is on Amazon, like books are. And the thing is that books on Amazon, once they get 50 reviews, they are more apt to come up in searches. And Jane Eyre Sisters is like in the high 30s, I think, right now. Like it's at 38 or 39 reviews. So let's pile into Amazon and review the book so that it can more easily come up in searches. You don't even have to type a review. You can just like pick stars, however many stars you want to give it. I'm picking 5 stars, but that's just me. And so if the community can come together and give the book a lift, then these ideas can get more out there into the world, and that benefits everybody. Jody has another book called The Princess Powers Up, which is available, I think, on Amazon. And yeah, so I think that's about it. Steph, could we go to the next slide? Really quick before we close, Stephanie and I would love to extend a super special thank you to the Fates and Graces patrons, who are the ones who are making it possible for this webinar to happen and to be free. Right, there are costs associated with organizing events, as I'm sure you know, and the support of our patrons is what keeps the lights on for the Fates and Graces. All our patrons are invited to a quarterly Zoom that we hold around the solstices and equinoxes, just so that we can check in with each other on how our writing is going, what we're reading, that kind of thing. So if you would like to become a patron, you can go to this website and join at any level, and you'll be invited to those Zoom events. So thank you so much to all our patrons for supporting this work. And that is just about it for today. Steph, could we go to the next slide? Yeah, so we hope to see you again next month for our second Mythlit webinar, which will be with Dennis Patrick Slattery to discuss A Pilgrimage Beyond Belief, which is another fantastic example of mythological literature. So you can register today at fatesandgraces.com/webinars. This one is free also. Meanwhile, keep on reading, keep on writing, and keep on living the Mythlit life. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.